So now we're going to go through the interaction one final time. Now we're going to look at the verbal channel of communication. Why I said what I said, how I interpreted what she said, that kind of stuff. Specifically, everything that's in the words. And we're going to go into crazy detail on these words, why I said things, etc., so that you can hopefully implement the same. Now, one little word of caution. I don't want you to try and implement the same verbal style as I do, or try and be super witty or super educated or whatever, but I do want you to understand the function of what I'm doing verbally so that you can use your own words to serve similar functions. I'm sorry, that might have been the most adorable expression I've ever seen in my entire life.
What?
The look of consternation and politeness on your face a second, it's just I don't even know. Two quick things verbally. First off, I opened with what we call a mini cold read. Basically what I'm doing is I'm making a statement about her. The reason why this is important is it makes it relevant to her. It makes whatever the dialogue is not some nebulous concept, but it immediately draws her attention because people focus very much on what is about them. Specifically, if something's about them and sort of invasive a little bit, it's either of value to them, they're either it's providing insight or information for them about themselves, or it's a threat, as in they feel like they may be being judged, or there may be social stigma, or social there's something potentially at risk. So it's meant to immediately get someone's attention. So that's the first thing I want to mention. The second thing is far more subtle, which is I said something, she didn't hear me, and she said what? Now, most people would repeat back the exact thing they just said. That's not a good idea in general, okay? It's something that so many guys do wrong. If you say something, the girl says what, and you repeat it back, number one, it seems try hard. Number two, she's probably already heard most of it, so it's going to sound kind of boring. Number three, when a girl says what, sometimes it's because she didn't hear you. Sometimes it's because something in what you just said struck her in a weird way or kind of put her off somehow, and that's why she said what. So if she says what, you probably want to think to yourself very briefly, very quickly, what about what I said could have set her off, what could have been offensive in it, what could have triggered a negative response in it. And you should probably say something similar, but maybe tone it down or avoid the thing that could have had that negative response, or avoid the thing that was maybe risky in it. Because a lot of guys, they'll say something that's offensive and the girl says what, or says what, and then if they just rephrase it in a different way, they just go on with the interaction, no problem. But if they said something the girl had an objection to, she said what, and then you said the same thing again, you're going to hit that objection head on, and you're going to derail the set to a very large degree, all right? So you do not want to exactly repeat what you said before when she says what. It's a very subtle thing, but it's one of those things that it can just derail sets in the dumbest ways, so just avoid it. I'm sorry.
Can I put back that?
I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm sorry.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Yes.
You are very bubbly. Two very tiny things here. One is, I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself, right? Not, hi, I'm Todd. I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself. As in, it would be assumed that she wants to get to know me, and I've been impolite not to have done her that courtesy in that service, right? Automatically from the start, I'm taking this frame that me giving my name is this privilege, it's this good thing that I was so rude not to bestow upon her. It's a subtle little framing thing, but it does make a difference. Second thing to notice is, so I started the set with the mini cold read, and then I had to change my direction, and so it kind of got thrown out the window a little bit. So now once we're in a positive frame of mind, and once I have her attention, I'm going to do essentially the same thing again. I'm going to hit up another mini cold read, and the idea here is, again, I'm trying to make it relevant to her. I'm trying to get her reacting to me, right? So basically, I tried it once. It didn't work. It did not work. She just really didn't hear it. And so then I didn't repeat it, I didn't force it, but then when I got another opportunity, I tried the same thing again. Had it blatantly not worked, I wouldn't have tried the same thing again, but because she just didn't hear it, I just tried to just progress the set the same way that I had before.
What?
You're very bubbly and happy, I love it.
Am I? That's not what I've ever gotten before, but I'll take your word for it.
Well, maybe it's just my influence.
Okay, probably.
Maybe just, you saw me and you got really, really happy and...
Yeah, exactly.
It's good, I'm flattered. I'm a little concerned, I'm not sure, it's a little too much too fast. I'm a very shy boy.
But, so
you're a shy boy? This is weird.
Girl.
So on a certain level, this is just basic frame control. You've probably seen this before. The one subtle thing I want to point out verbally here is that when I sort of go off on tangents, or when I say a lot of things that are frames I wish were true or frames I would like to put into the interaction, you'll notice that the speed at which I speak actually speeds up. Now, this isn't something that I am consciously implementing. This is something I just learned over time through trial and error. But what happens is, by talking fast as I'm trying to insert all these different frames into the conversation, it means that I won't be interrupted, and it means that she's kind of being hit by these frames at a very rapid rate. And so she can't react to all of them. When I'm trying to have a more mellow conversation, when I'm trying to be more relaxed, I'm trying to build comfort, my verbal pacing will actually slow down. So this is another channel that you have to communicate, is the speed at which you're talking. And there are times when it's actually very useful to talk fast. There are times when it's very useful to talk slow, and there are a lot of reasons for both. But just be aware of that communication channel, because it's something people really don't ever talk about in-game.
Excuse me, but yeah.
Yeah? You're a little adorable.
Thanks.
What is, before we go both find our people, what is your story briefly?
What do you mean my story?
This lesson should be nothing new, but it's a very, very useful one, which is, you just saw me use the false time constraint, and then I asked her for information, asked her to qualify herself. And that would be something that moves the interaction forward, which is an escalation in a way. That's useful as far as it goes, but what I want to point out here is the general principle, which is this. Generally, when you are escalating, it's a good idea to disqualify and escalate at the same time, because it makes the escalation seem like less of a big deal. Right? So for example, if you say I have to go in a minute, as you give the girl a hug or touch her for the first time or something like that, or if you say even I'm not so sure about you, or I don't like you, or I can't believe you said that, something that's a little negative as you're escalating, it softens the escalation because it seems like the escalation is not so forceful and not so direct. And it also takes attention off of the escalation because the attention is more likely to be on her level of validation than on whatever happened physically. This can be used for verbal escalation, physical escalation, logistical escalation, all of the above. It's a general principle in game, but again, it's a principle that just doesn't get taught very much, which is to de-escalate while you're escalating, kind of, right? So the constraint or the disqualifier is the de-escalation, but then what you're doing within the set is the bigger escalation. You have a big escalation, a small de-escalation, which makes the escalation on net seem smaller. What would surprise me about you, other than, the bubbliness that surprises you about you?
I'm new to New York.
Okay. How long?
A few weeks.
Congratulations. Welcome to my city. I appreciate it.
Thanks. So what about you?
What about me?
What's something interesting about you?
So I've lived in New York for quite a while, but I travel way too much, and so I'm here and there and here. I just got back I did an 8-city trip, so I'm very excited to be back in my city. Yeah. I don't know, beyond that, I don't know, what do you want? Hopeless romantic, long walks on the beach?
I don't know. Just whatever you've got for me, really.
Whatever I've got for you? Mm-hmm. You'll take anything I've got.
Yeah.
All right. Oftentimes, it's useful in set, in talking to a girl, to repeat back to her what she just said. There's a lot of circumstances where this can be very, very powerful. One is if she just said something that can be misinterpreted or could be interpreted as a compliment in some way, just repeat back as though you didn't quite hear it, and it cements the fact in the conversation that it just occurred. So that's one really good thing, is you can call attention to a positive she just gave you, or call attention to something she just said that was risque or that showed that she was attracted to you by repeating it as though you didn't understand. The other time that it's very useful to repeat as though you didn't understand is if a girl gives you a shit test. A lot of times you can repeat it back as a question, and then you don't even have to pass the shit test. So for example, if the girl goes I'm not really sure you're my type, you go, I'm not your type, right? And instead of putting the impetus on you to pass the shit test, it puts the impetus on her to justify the shit test. So that's another very, very useful thing that you can do with respect to repeating back to the girl. And in the shit test example, it's also useful because if you don't have an answer to the shit test, repeating it back means you don't have to think of one. It also buys you time to kind of catch your bearings and figure out what's going on. So actually, repetition of what the girl just said can be a useful technique in both of these contexts. Who are you here at the moment? Just you or a bunch of friends? So this is a very, very minute detail, kind of nitpicky, but one thing you can do a lot of times in game is instead of just asking a question, ask a question and give a little more information on top of it. It can be useful to take attention off of the question and also to make it easier for her to answer. So for example, here, I could have just said, who are you here with? But that's very maybe she'd view that as like I'm judging her and she'd treat it as a shit test and she'd lock up or be defensive. Or maybe she'd be like, why do you care? And she might feel threatened by it or whatever. But when I say who you're here with is just you or a bunch of friends, it makes it sound a lot more casual. It also makes the answer a lot easier for her because I've indicated what I'm looking for. This kind of technique can also be used to establish a frame. So for example, I can be like, a good question for logistics is, are your friends very protective? But that's a fucking scary sounding question, right? So I'd be like, are your friends like super protective, like to the point where if you went 5 feet away from them, they'd like call the cops, or do they realize you're an adult and you can make a decision or two on your own in life, right? So what I did is I took pressure and emphasis off of that, made it easier to answer, and then I also framed it as though if her friends are very protective, that's kind of weird and creepy. So I'm indicating the right answer and nudging her along towards the answer I want. So this technique of asking the question and then filling in an opinion or filling in extra information is a really good verbal technique to use in various contexts.
No, I'm looking to meet someone.
Okay.
I have to find him.
Oh, fair enough. Well,
Who are
hi,
you here
I'm
with?
Todd. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
This isn't really verbal game technically because it's silent verbal game, but it's a really good technique that I use, which is if a girl says something that can be misinterpreted, I just give her a look, like a quizzical look or like a smile or something like that. Just something that like brings her attention to the fact that she just said it, right? But it's also subtle enough that if she justifies it too much, she was trying hard. And if she gets offended that I gave it, or if she feels like I'm making fun of her or whatever, I can just plausibly be like, what are you talking about? Right? Like it didn't even happen. So it's a good little subtle thing to do, is just when a girl says something that you'd like to draw attention to, you just kind of like squint your eyes a little bit or like look quizzically or something like that, and that just draws that one thing into focus for the interaction. Interesting. I'm supposed to meet people in a little bit, but nobody's here as yet.
Gotcha.
I'm the one at the moment. You live in Manhattan?
Yeah.
Do you do drinks with cute, spontaneous boys?
So spontaneous.
You give me
Yeah.
the funniest look just now.
Do you live in Manhattan?
I do. Like meatpacking area? Okay. That's good. I mean, you're kind of far away, but it's like a straight shot, so it's fine.
Oh, okay.
As long
You're
as
like planning it out. All right.
As long as there's no like crosstown taxis involved and us hanging out, it's okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
That's where I draw the line.
All right.
I mean, you're charming and all, but like, a boy's
You have to
got to
know
have his
where
standards.
Where the line is, as long as you know it. Yeah, it's good. You always need a line.
Okay, so what brings the adorable, sort of innocent-seeming girl to New York? Okay. So, because you were passionate about a subject, or because you just didn't want to leave school?
Because I'm passionate about a subject, and I need my master's to get the job I want.
Okay. I feel like being a parent being like, good girl, but no, tell me more about it. I'm sorry. That's almost condescending. So this is a behavior that I do a lot in Inset, and it's interesting because it's actually like kind of a weak verbal behavior, but it's actually kind of useful. So I say, I feel like doing this, or I'm kind of tempted to do this, instead of just saying it overtly or explicitly stating an opinion, right? And it's a very weak form of expression, like it's very waffly. But the reason why I do it though is that if there's something that could be a little over the line, I think it's a little too risky, I'll use that to soften it, right? I'll use, I'm kind of tempted to do this, or there's a part of me that wants to do this, I totally wouldn't, but. And so I'm able to introduce this thing into the conversation in a polite enough way that I can get away with it, whereas it could be too close to home. Like in this case, this girl just basically told me like something very personal to herself and like her life's ambition. And quite frankly, I was like, the way you said that is really cute. And if she has a really good sense of humor, she might be able to take that. But if she has like a bad sense of humor, or she's like pretty insecure about it or whatever, it could be hitting a little too close to home. So when I say it, I don't just overtly say it, I soften it a little bit. I'm sorry to have offended you by state.
No,
Goodness.
it's okay.
Fair enough. See, we're off to such a good start, but now it's just not going to work out.
Yeah.
It's too bad.
We were on the same side of the city, and then it's all downhill from there.
I know. It was nice meeting you. I want you to know
It was
it's
nice
not
meeting
you,
you.
it's me. So this is interesting. So what did I just say? I said the phrase, it's not you, it's me. Right? Now, why is that important? Well, what I did essentially is that I used culture to tease for me, right? Because the phrase, it's not you, it's me, is such a cliche term for a breakup that I basically am hijacking all of her cultural associations, all of her cultural connotations, that kind of stuff. So anytime that there are like catchphrases in culture or things from popular movies that almost everybody's seen that mean something, if you can sort of vaguely refer to them, you get a lot more meaning with a lot fewer words, right? You can be very subtle by implying this thing, and it implies this whole range of emotion, and it'll have a much bigger emotional impact on her. So it can be very, very useful. That said, one thing to be careful of is don't do this with foreigners. Do not do this with people who you don't know their cultural iconography and you don't know what they're going to respond to, because then it's going to go over their head, it's going to confuse them, a lot of the meaning will be lost. But if you happen to know what cultural background someone has and you can use a cultural reference to tease for you, or you can draw on their sort of like some cultural idea or cultural feeling they've had ever since a kid, that can be a very, very powerful thing to be able to have access to, so you can do a lot with a little.
I still definitely think, you. I know it's you.
I still think you're a wonderful person.
Thank you.
I would hope that one day we could be friends. It'll hurt for a while for me.
Okay.
So, yeah, it might take me a while to get over it.
Oh, it definitely will.
I might have to date like 5 or 6 other people in between or something.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it happens to the best of us.
Yeah, you have that effect on men.
Yeah, definitely.
You're super adorable. I literally don't even know. Okay, so means that you work a lot, but your schedule is fairly free. So it's like a lot of like working, like you have a little bit of classes, but then you have a lot of like research time.
And then I try and stay sane the other time.
How's that working out?
A lot of drinking.
Well, I go out a lot too, so we can, you know.
Well,
I'll tell you what, we can go out, we can hang out together. Just like we'll keep the Googleable Facebook facts to like a minimum, so that if you become a weird stalker, like you have limited ammo.
Good. I'm glad you're acknowledging that you're going to become a weird stalker and that I need to be preventative.
So you're. I don't know what to do with you.
Probably run away.
Maybe. You're witty and at least partially educated though, so that's good.
Partially, yeah.
You know, you're partway through your education. So this is a huge point I want to make. I said you're partially educated, but notice a couple things about the nature of what I said and the delivery of what I said. Number one, I said it in the middle of this other sentence. It wasn't like I'm like, you're partially educated. Pause in a vacuum like it's a big deal. Okay? It's thrown in the middle of other stuff so that it seems very accidental, it seems very nonchalant, it seems like not a big deal. Whenever you use like a push-pull, teasy, gamey line and you draw a lot of attention to it and make it a big deal, it just drops like a ton of bricks and it just really doesn't work. But if you drop it in nonchalantly in the middle of a sentence like it's no big deal, that can be very useful. Second thing is, teasing or even negging is different than insulting. Okay? You're partially educated. It could technically be taken as an insult, but it's not. You're partially educated is, I said it's good you're partially educated, right? So it's taken as a positive thing. And if she takes it as a negative, it's plausible, there's plausible deniability, right? She goes, what, partially educated? I'm like, yeah, you're partway through your education. She's literally in school. She literally is partially educated, right? So she cannot be offended by that. If I said, you're stupid, she can be offended by that. If you're like, you're not educated or you have low education, she can be offended by that because there's that actual judgment in there. Does that make sense? But when something is factually correct and you're just drawing attention to the negative side of the fact, it's, again, much subtler. And two, if you're ever called out on it, it wasn't rude at all. Like, that is a compliment. On a very technical, literal level, what I gave her is a compliment. It's just a compliment which provokes insecurity, and that's what a neg or a tease actually is. It's not an overt insult. So here's a question. When what you're doing, are you actually really learning stuff, or are you just doing it to get the degree and then you're just going to do whatever you would have done before? You are a dork, but you're an adorable one. I like it.
Thanks. So what do you do? Besides just travel.
Well,
left and right.
The short story is I used to play poker, and now I don't really have to anymore. I invest in travel and...
That's nice. Social workers don't do that. I don't know if you're familiar.
You don't travel? You don't invest?
I try and travel. I don't think I have any. I invest in my education, I guess.
Investing in yourself. It is what it is. Fair enough.
Whether it works out for me or not,
You know.
to be determined.
Tell you what, you can bring the good karma to the relationship, and I'll bring everything practical in the real world, and it'll be great.
Okay, that's all we need. Balance each other out right there.
Look at that. You're like, we already established it's not going to work. You're so ready to just jump right back on board with me. See? We're going to have an on again, off again thing. I don't know.
Sometimes it's all you can do.
How old are you?
What? How old do you think I am?
Oh my God. Old enough to use the cheesiest lines over and over again.
Yes.
So that's going to be like. So I want to point out again, very very subtle. But so there's a lot of banter there. There's a lot of back and forth, teasing, banter, push, pull, that kind of stuff. There are actually two interesting things. One was during the banter. A lot of times, a couple times, if I said something that could be perceived as a negative, I would immediately excuse it afterwards. But it's all good. You're cute or whatever. Or you're cool. It's all good. Something like that, just to soften it. Right? So I was trying to keep the banter from being too harsh or being too offensive, especially because a lot of the banter was kind of along the premise of me being cooler than her, that kind of stuff. So I was trying not to be like too oppressive and too negative or too strong with it. But the other thing I want to point out is right at the very end of it. So most guys, when they're talking, they have a very linear idea about conversation. Like most guys, if they start a story, they want to finish the story. They start a joke, they want to finish the joke. They start bantering, they get caught up in the banter, and they kind of want to like finish the banter, so to speak. And it's very, very detrimental to game, because game isn't about what linearly, logically is happening on a verbal level. It's about the emotions being conveyed. And so one of the most useful things you can do verbally is interrupt the girl, but also interrupt yourself. If things are going in a direction that isn't as useful, or it's been overplayed or gone too far, just cut it, right? So what did I do right here? I was talking, we were teasing, and then I just immediately changed. I was like, wait, how old are you? Right? So it's playful, push, pull, wait, how old are you? Immediate change of tone, immediate interruption, and on to another topic. Because at this point, nothing more is going to be gained by more teasing and more banter. So let's get on with it. Let's not overdo it. Let's not overgame. Let's get on with it. And because the frame was good and the vibe was good, I can be a little demanding. I can ask her to qualify. So why not utilize that in that moment? 23, 24, something like that. You're right, son. All right.
No, you're wrong.
How old are you? Oh. Well, look at you. So precocious.
I usually get older though. I usually get like 26. That's what people tell me.
Well, you usually don't give people cheesy pickup lines in bars. Little thing here, the use of the word precocious. Okay, now we've talked in the other layers of the video about her blueprint a little bit and how she values education and intelligence, that kind of stuff. So when I use the word precocious here, one of two things is going to happen. One, she knows the word well, but it's not a word that's used very much, and so I'm indicating to her that I'm, as my high school English teacher would call it, a member of the ruling class, right? I'm indicating to her that I am of that educated class. I am right up there with her education-wise. So if she values herself and views herself as educated elite, I'm saying I'm in that category too, in like a subtle little way, right? Even better, if she's this girl almost certainly does know what the word precocious means because she's pretty educated, but if she didn't know what it meant, even better. Because even better, now she has to wonder what that word means, and then she has a choice. She can either ask me what it means, which is saying that I'm cooler in that area that she actually values than she is, or she can not ask me what it means. And in that case, she's going to know that she values education, she values learning, that kind of stuff. She's going to know that she blatantly avoided an opportunity to learn something in order to impress me. What does that say about how much she likes me? What does that say about the frame and the relationship between the two of us? So all of the outcomes from that are very, very good. And that's specific to this girl. I wouldn't do this with every girl. I don't use big words just to use big words. But because this girl values education, because it's part of her blueprint, this is how I kind of exploit that blueprint. It's how I utilize that information to my benefit. So you know.
You're in there. But...
You're in there?
Yeah, how old are you?
How old am I?
Yeah.
How old do you think?
28.
I'm a little older than that.
30.
A little older.
34.
I want to say a little older and just keep you guessing, but I am 34.
Okay.
Yeah. I wanted to keep going and see how long you'd believe. It'd be like 60, 65.
I think I would have walked away before I hit 65.
Oh, really? You're an ageist. You're a social worker. You're supposed to be politically correct.
Like...
What if I'm just very healthy and well preserved?
Could be it.
Nah. It's okay, don't worry.
But you should have been like maybe a little like grossed out by my age if you were 65.
As long as you're mature. Well, no, but but I'm also not 65, so your maturity level only has to be up to a certain.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that one.
Well, no, but never mind.
Why? No, tell me.
I was gonna say I'm 65 from the waist down, so don't get any ideas. Okay, I'm useless.
The only things I like to be 65.
So I mentioned this in the previous the inside her mind cut and whatnot. But I want to point this out as a verbal, because there I was talking about the emotional impact it's having on her. Now I just want to point this out as an overt verbal technique. This is a verbal technique known as an open loop. It's very, very, very useful. What you can do is you start something and then never mind, or you start telling a story and you can tell she's getting into it, and then you get distracted and don't tell it or something like that. Works particularly well when it's something related to her because it's relevant and it's something she's going to want to see the end of. But what you're doing here basically is you're setting up a dynamic where instead of just talking at her, you're getting her to ask you to talk, right? And when she asks you to talk, she's investing, she's committing, that's all much better. Also, anything she asks for, if it's positive about you, can't be taken as bragging because she asked for it.
It worked out for both of us. Why would you think I wouldn't be about that?
Oh, perfect. Yeah. I'll be very sexually undemanding. I'll be quick. You won't feel a thing. And
no sex before marriage.
Right. I'm a virgin too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You think I'm joking?
You are fucking adorable. I'm surprised by you.
Why?
Do you know the phrase? Do you know the phrase to grow on someone? Most people do the opposite with me.
Oh, you picky.
I mean, I think anyone with the ability to be should be, yes?
I disagree.
You disagree?
Totally believe that there's something good about everyone and that...
Yeah, but how are you going to get the best if you don't ask for it and strive for it?
But how can you not bring out the best in someone else?
I do. I bring out the best in people I select as the best.
That's not fair.
Why is that not fair?
Because you're missing out on a lot of people.
There's 7 billion or so in the world. I don't have time for all of them. I have to pick and choose. If everyone's
but
special.
But it would be better if it was random selection, not a systematic selection.
Really? No. No. Like, if you were hiring for a job, would you want someone that has a certain credential, or would you just want any random person off the street?
That's completely different.
It's random selection versus discerning selection.
Selecting someone to fill a role. By being my friend, you're not fulfilling a role.
By being my friends, or anything else, you would be filling a role.
You have standards to pick up to. Perfect.
That said, to your credit, you're not falling far short of the parameters thus far. So
I kind of wish I was.
Yeah.
Just so you would just so I could feel the wrath of that.
The wrath? It wouldn't be wrath. It'd be more ice. It'd be like, nice to meet you, bud. Actually, it'd be very pleasant. It'd be like, you know what? It's been a pleasure meeting. It's been amazing. I do have to. My friends, I think. Yep, that was them buzzing. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but anyway, it's been real. Have a good time in my city, and see you never.
Your city. It's your city. Okay.
I mentioned this a little bit in the other cut, the inside her mind cut, but one very, very powerful technique is to speak in the hypothetical, right? It would be like this, I would do this, that kind of a thing, because no one can object to a hypothetical, but they can object to an actual, right? But it still brings the same topics to play in the conversation. It's still, in order for them to understand it, they have to go through the same emotional process, et cetera, et cetera. This is very, very useful. Even back as early as 2000, there was this phrase or this technique in game called quotes, and the idea was instead of saying something, you say you overheard someone else saying something, or you say you heard this crazy story, and then that sort of relieves you of the responsibility, but it still introduces the topic or introduces that line of conversation.
I'll avoid the meatpacking district from here on out.
I mean, unless you want to be friends and hang out.
I mean, I'm not meeting your standards.
I didn't say you weren't. I said you were. I said, thankfully, you're not falling well short of my standards, so.
Thanks.
very welcome.
I live to meet your standards.
That's a little strong. We just met.
This is sarcasm right there.
Can you? What is that?
Vodka soda?
No, sarcasm. What is that? Vodka soda I'm acquainted with. Sarcasm is foreign to me.
Actually, it's just water with lime in it.
Is it really? You're trying to fool and trick innocent boys to getting drunk so you can take advantage of them while you drink water?
No, I brought my roofies for that. Come on.
Fair enough.
No, it's actually enough.
At least promise that you'll cuddle with me and get me in a safe cab home, okay?
I mean, you said roofies really aren't worth you because you're 65 from the waist down, so unhelpful right there.
Oh, you can mix roofies. So this is an interesting kind of a thing. It's not a perfect example of it, but it's something worth illustrating. I talked about the cultural iconography of certain things before, how you can tease using cultural iconography. Here, a lot of times you can imply things with the cultural iconography in order to avoid raising red flags. So for example, you can say like cuddle and have breakfast as a euphemism for sex. Does that make sense? And so here, I'm not going to say, you know, we're having a roofies joke. I'm not going to say as long as you don't like fuck me cowgirl or some shit like that, right? Because that's very like, ugh, what the fuck? Like I took it too far. I went like very like coarse with it, right? But instead, if I say, you know, as long as you promise to cuddle and like get me in a cab in the morning or something like that, it implies the thing without saying it. It also implies a different experience, right? It implies that the sex we're going to have, because the sex we're going to have probably won't be roofie sex, but it'll be, you know, sex of some kinds. It will be an experience where there is a cab in the morning and there is like people taking care of each other and stuff, because most likely she's going to be on the flip side of it. She'll be the one that needs the taking care of, or I'll be like handling, making sure she has a pleasant experience in the morning. So if I'm indicating that I expect that from her, it implies the same thing in the reverse. All right. So using these euphemisms, using these cultural iconographies, again, can be very, very useful. And this is another instance of that kind of a usage. Viagra, I suppose. That'd be like a interesting little cocktail.
I didn't bring my Viagra, so you would have to supply that. That just complicates everything.
And we're back to I bring everything to this relationship.
Oh, you bring everything?
Everything.
I think I bring the looks.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Kindness?
I mean, you are pretty, but like I think that's insulting.
Just roll with it.
You can bring. You probably are kinder than I, actually.
Yeah. I think I bring the fun.
You bring the fun? All right, I'm gonna warn you right now on this one. You're gonna just roll your eyes after you hear this, but it is something that went through my head and is something I use on a relatively regular basis, one way or another. So right there, I said kinder than I, which, by the way, is correct. Right? Everybody and their mother and their father and their brother says kinder than me. And that's not correct, because the technical phrase is kinder than I am, and you're contracting it to kinder than I. Right? The fact that I know that, don't ask me why I'm that much of a grammar Nazi, and I happen to know that. However, it does sound educated, but it also sounds like potentially wrong, where someone might dispute it. And with someone who values education, if she happens to know that kinder than I is right, she's going to be fucking impressed that I know that. If she happens to not know it, and she happens, because she's a little sassy, she happens to dispute it, and she's wrong, then how much is that going to show her up in terms of that? So I'm actually like kind of openly provoking that intellectual debate with her if she wants to go there. Like it may or may not happen, but it is a tiny little detail, etc. Now, do you have to have fucking perfect grammar and even know that that's correct to game? You absolutely don't. Do you have to use that technique? No. Should you use that technique on every girl? Absolutely not. Again, this is related to this particular girl's blueprint, which is that she values education, values being perceived as smart. Okay? So it's just a tiny little, very intricate little booby trap that was in the conversation for her. I almost like, I buzzed through this and wasn't even going to break it down, but I was like, fuck it, you know what? I want to break it down just so you can see the utilization of blueprint aspect of it. Do I recommend copying this in your own interactions? Probably not. But I just want you to understand that blueprint aspect and how I am calibrating and utilizing and how I am thinking a step ahead. You obviously have never met me, Jay.
I think we just met, actually. So that's funny.
Yeah. you've obviously never met me prior to 5 minutes ago.
Yeah. Why?
I don't know. Because I don't know, fun isn't my word to describe it. Adventure would be a better word. Adventure, adventurous. Fun you can determine, I suppose. Fair enough. I'm a little tempted to take you on an adventure, but I don't know you that well. And also you seem...
Yeah, I mean, like, I have plans for tonight, but I'm up for it.
All right, so this is what's called seeding the poll, right? This is the verbal of seeding the poll. I'm a little tempted to do X, but da-da-da-da-da. I use this format so often. Because instead of saying, hey, let's go get a drink, she can say no to that. You say, hey, I'm a little tempted to get a drink with you, but da-da-da-da-da. By her response to that, you're going to find out if she would have said yes to let's go get a drink, and then you can just ask her in a minute, or you can follow through with her, whatever. But if the answer would have been no, you're going to find that out as well without hearing no, because you sort of like rejected her first before you even put it out there, right? I call it, like, again, seeding the poll, or I call it a soft close. Extraordinarily useful technique and tactic. Learn it, use it. It will fucking save your life, and it will help you with so many venue changes and so many polls.
Yeah, and you're meeting your friends.
Eventually, yeah.
And I'm firm on not being a flaky person and not contributing to other people being flaky people.
For one, my friends would understand. If I told them I met someone cool, they'd be like, all right.
What's the matter?
That said, we barely met, and let's take it slow on all of that in general before we like get into all that.
Yeah. You don't want to be halfway into an adventure with me and then just want to ditch me. That'd just be awkward.
I manage. I'm good at extricating.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. I would join you for a quick drink while we're here if you would like. I know you have a half. I have a zero.
I have a lot. Yeah, you
lot?
should go get a drink. Yeah.
Fair enough.
So I'm not the only alcoholic.
You're adorable. So this person you're allegedly meeting, I'm guessing, what, Tinder date?
I don't know.
Whatever. Worse. Oh
I'm
God.
getting into the details.
Oh God, worse.
I've met him before.
Okay. But that's worse? Okay.
Situations of
Okay. You roofied him too?
Well, it'll all work out. I've done well so far. We'll be fine.
I just like giving you a hard time, that's all.
I have said hey. I don't mind it.
I can tell.
What? Are you like glaring at me intently?
Intently perhaps, glaring never.
Gazing.
Wow, that makes it sound so like, I don't know. Makes it sound so forward of me. Gazing intently.
It is a little forward.
Really? Would you prefer I were backward?
Always like it's backward.
For you momentarily. How presently you're expecting your compatriot?
I think he's here. Just not going to approach him first. What?
What am I going to do with you? Alright, so here's the deal with me. Just so you know. So, that's adorable. So I am here for like one more day and then I'm flying to LA. I'll be back in like a week and a half.
Yeah.
You'd like to grab a drink in a week and a half?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. How would I contact you? I'm going to get a drink, but how would I
I
contact
have
you?
a phone.
Okay.
It's like this crazy thing. I don't know if you've heard of it before, but
I
do
use
have
smoke
one.
signals personally, but I can upgrade.
My pigeon, he just like broke a wing, and it's hard to find a good pigeon these days, you know?
So you don't take care of your pigeons, they won't take care of you.
It wasn't my fault.
Uh-huh. Alright. You have to remind me your name. Okay, you're adorable. We can't do that. I'm a virgin, remember?
Same.
I know, right? I will hopefully get to hang out with you in a week and a half or so. You're fun, for sure.
Don't be flaky though.
Oh my god.
I'm joking.
Alright. Have some semblance of fun, and if you get bored, text me and be like, hey, I'm bored, save me.
Hey, yeah, have a good night. Oh, I don't have your number.
I'll text
have a good
you.
night. Meet up with your friends.
Yeah.
Maybe approach this guy. Probably not.
You want some help?
No.
All right. All right.
Clearly, I'm fine just walking around on my own.
All right. This is a very useful little technique here. She says she doesn't mind me teasing her or whatever when I say I can tell. Another very common kind of version of this is if a girl says something positive or gives me a certain look and I just look at her and go, oh, you like me, right? Calling overt attention to the fact that she likes me is very, very useful, right? Calling particular attention to the fact that she's enjoying the interaction is very, very useful. Another one that I'll sometimes call attention to is if there are like nonverbal gestures that show attraction, I'll call attention to that. Like I'll call attention to the fact that she's blushing or the fact that she just bit her lip or something like that, right? Because it takes this intangible and it makes it tangible. It makes it a logical fact that she likes me, right? And if she doesn't dispute it, that's now assumed to be true in the conversation. So it'd be very, very, very useful to do.